Continuing on with section 6.2, this is part 3. We want to factor this trinomial. Our first step is to see if there's anything that we can factor out of all of them, and the answer is no. Okay? We have 3 terms. We end up to the part of our factoring flowchart that says to do 6.2. And that means we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply to a positive 36. It always comes from this value. And I need it to add to a negative 13. Okay? Now don't pay too much attention to the signs. I want to list everything that multiplies to 36. 1 times 36 works. And then 2 times 18. 3 times 12. 4 times 9. 5 does not work. And then I get 6 times 6, and I've wrapped around. Okay. So these are all the combinations that give me 36. I could make one of them negative and get a negative 36, but these are the only pairs of numbers that could possibly give me any version of 36. Okay, now I want them to add to a negative number. If you recall on the one before, I said if you're multiplying to a positive, you either have a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. I want to add to a negative number this time. That means I need them both to be negative. Okay? Now look for these that, if they were both negative, could add to a positive 13. That would give me negative 37, negative 20, negative 15. 4 plus 9 is 13, and if I make both of these negative, I can work. Double check this. Always double check your signs. If I multiply these together, I get positive 36. If I add these together, I get negative 13. Okay, so I can go directly to my answer now. Make sure you use the correct variable. X minus 4 times x minus 9. Now this is the same as x minus 9 times x minus 4. It does not matter which of these 2 numbers you write down first. Okay, so let's try this one. Y squared minus 6y plus 8. We do not have a greatest common factor. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to a positive 8. And I need them to add to a negative 6. Multiplying to a positive, adding to a negative, means I'm going to have 2 negative numbers. Let's multiply to 8. That would be 1 and 8. 2 and 4, 3 does not work, 4 is already listed. If I make both of these negative, I get a negative 9 when I add them together. However, if I make both of these negative, they do multiply to a positive 8, and they add to a negative 6. So my answer would be y minus 2 times y minus 4. Okay, so let's look at this one. M squared minus 10m minus 24. We do not have a GCF. I need to multiply to a negative 24, okay? This is the first one we've had where our multiplication needs to be negative. That means I either have a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive. Combination of signs is the only way that's going to work. Now I want my answer to add to a negative 10. Okay, let's think a little bit. If I'm adding a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive, really what I'm doing is I'm subtracting, right? So this is really a subtract because opposite signs. Okay, let's not worry too much about that just yet. Think of things that multiply to a 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, and then nothing else gives me 24. All right, so I either have a negative, like -1, positive 24, or vice versa. So I'm looking for things that subtract to a 10. Don't worry about the sign too much. Well, I could do 12 minus 2, and that would give me a 10. If I'm thinking adding, I could also add the 4 and the 6. This is what I meant about being really careful with your signs, because you have two that seem like they might work. And if you're not being careful, it won't. Okay? Now look at this one. Let's talk about why it's wrong, why this one won't work. If I wanted to add them to -10, I would need to do a -4 and a -6. But if I multiply -4 and -6, I get a positive 24. The signs don't work here. If I take the 2 and the 12, and I make the 12 a negative, then 2 plus -12 is -10. And if I multiply these together, I get -24. This is the only one that will work. So this factors as m plus 2 times m minus 12. Okay, these parentheses are important. You cannot just drop them. All right.